Hello, everyone, and welcome to Flying Monkey Monday, where I'll be reading The Road to Oz, brought to you by Junior Classic Books. In just a few moments, right now, I'm going to let people know that I'm streaming, and I'll be right back. One moment. Chapter 18. The Emerald City. The others now came up, and the Tin Woodman greeted the lion and the tiger cordially. Button Bright yelled with fear when Dorothy first took his hand and led him toward the great beast, but the girl insisted they were kind and good, and so the boy mustered up courage enough to pat their heads. After they had spoken to him gently, and he had looked into their intelligent eyes, his fear vanished entirely, and he was so delighted with the animals that he wanted to keep close to them and stroke their soft fur every minute. As for the Shaggy Man, he might have been afraid if he had met the beast alone, or in any other country. But so many were the marvels in the Land of Oz that he was no longer easily surprised, and Dorothy's friendship for the lion and tiger was enough to assure him they were safe companions. Toto barked at the cowardly lion in joyous greeting, for he knew the beast of old and loved him, and it was funny to see how gentle the lion raised his huge paw to pat Toto's head. The little dog smelled of the tiger's nose, and the tiger politely shook paws with him, so they were quite likely to become firm friends. Tik-Tok and Belina knew the beast well, so merely bade them good day and asked after their healths and inquired about the Princess Ozma. Now it was seen that the Cowardly Lion and the Hungry Tiger were trolling behind them a splendid golden chariot, to which they were harnessed by golden cords. The body of the chariot was decorated on the outside with designs and clusters of sparkling emeralds, while inside it was lined with a green and gold satin, and the cushions of the seats were of green plush embroidered in gold, with a crown underneath which was a monogram.
Why, it's Ozma's own royal chariot,
exclaimed Dorothy. Yes, said the Cowardly Lion. Ozma sent us to meet you here, for she feared you would be weary with your long walk, and she wished you to enter the city in a style becoming your exalted rank.
What?
Cried Polly, looking at Dorothy curiously.
Do you belong to the nobility? Just in Oz I do,
said the child.
'Cause Ozma made me a princess, you know, but when I'm home in Kansas, I'm only a country girl and have to help with the churning and the dishes while Aunt Em washes them. Do you have to help wash dishes on the Rainbow, Polly? No, dear,
answered Polychrome, smiling.
Well, I don't have to work any in Oz either,
said Dorothy.
It's kind of fun to be a princess once in a while, don't you think so?
Dorothy and Polychrome and Button Bright are all to ride in the chariot, said the lion. So get in, my dears, and be careful not to mar the gold or put your dusty feet on the embroidery. Button Bright was delighted to ride behind such a superb team, and he told Dorothy it made him feel like an actor in a circus. As the strides of the animals brought them near to the Emerald City, everyone bowed respectfully to the children, as well as to the Tin Woodsman, Tik-Tok and the Shaggy Man, who were following behind. The Yellow Hen had perched upon the back of the chariot, where she could tell Dorothy more about her wonderful chickens as they rode. And so the grand chariot came finally to the high wall surrounding the city, and paused before the magnificent jewel-studded gates. These were opened by a cheerful-looking little man, who wore green spectacles over his eyes. Dorothy introduced him to her friends as the guardian of the gates, and they noticed a big bunch of keys suspended on the golden chain they hung around his neck. The chariot passed through the outer gates into a fine arched chamber built in the thick wall, and through the inner gates into the streets of the Emerald City. Polychrome exclaimed in rapture at the wondrous beauty that met her eyes on every side as they rode through this stately and imposing city, the equal of which has never been discovered, even in Fairyland. Button Bright could only say,
My,
so amazing was the sight. But his eyes were wide open, and he tried to look in every direction at the same time, so as not to miss anything. The Shaggy Man was fairly astounded at what he saw, for the graceful and handsome buildings were covered with plates of gold and set with emeralds so splendid and valuable that in any other part of the world any one of them would have been worth a fortune to its owner. The sidewalks were superb marble slabs, polished as smooth as glass, and the curbs that separated the walks from the broad streets were also set thick with clustered emeralds. There were many people on these walksmen, women and children, all dressed in handsome garments of silk or satin or velvet, with beautiful jewels. Better even than this, all seemed happy and contented, for their faces were smiling and free from care, and music and laughter might be heard on every side. "Don't they work at all?" asked the Shaggy Man. "To be sure they work," replied the Tin Woodsman. "This fair city could not be built or cared for without labor, nor could the fruit and vegetables and other food be provided for the inhabitants to eat, but no one works more than half his time, and the people of Oz enjoy their labors as much as they do their play." "It's wonderful," declared the Shaggy Man. "I do hope Osmond will let me live here." The chariot, winding through many charming streets, paused before a building so vast and noble and elegant that even Button Bright guessed at once that it was the royal palace. Its gardens and ample grounds were surrounded by a separate wall, not so high or thick as the wall around the city, but more daintily designed and built all of green marble. The gates flew open as the chariot appeared before them, and the Cowardly Lion and Hungry Tiger trotted up a jeweled driveway to the front door of the palace and stopped short.
here we are,
said Dorothy gaily, and helped Button Bright from the chariot. Polychrome leaped out lightly after them, and they were greeted by a crowd of gorgeously dressed servants who bowed low as the visitors mounted the marble steps. At their head was a pretty little maid with dark hair and eyes, dressed all in green embroidered with silver. Dorothy ran up to her with evident pleasure and exclaimed,
"Oh, Jelly Jam, I'm so glad to see you again. Where's Ozma?" "In her room, Your Highness,"
replied the little maid demurely, for this was Ozma's favorite attendant.
"She wishes you to come to her as soon as you have rested and changed your dress. Princess Dorothy and you and your friends are to dine with her this evening." "When is her birthday, Julia?"
asked the girl.
"Day after tomorrow, Your Highness. And where's the Scarecrow?" "He's gone into the Munchkin country to get some fresh straw to stuff himself with in honor of Ozma's celebration,"
replied the maid.
"He returns to the Emerald City tomorrow," he said.
By this time Tik-Tok, the Tin Woodsman, and the Shaggy Man had arrived, and the chariot had gone around to the back of the palace, Belinda going with the lion and tiger to see her chickens after her absence from them, but Toto stayed close beside Dorothy.
"Come in, please,"
said Jelly Jam.
"It shall be our pleasant duty to escort all of you to the rooms prepared for your use."
The Shaggy Man hesitated Dorothy had never known him to be ashamed of his shaggy looks before, but now that he was surrounded by so much magnificence and splendor, the Shaggy Man felt sadly out of place. Dorothy assured him that all her friends were welcome at Ozma's palace. So he carefully dusted his shaggy shoes with his shaggy handkerchief and entered the grand hall after the others. Tik-Tok lived at the royal palace, and the Tin Woodsman always had the same room whenever he visited Ozma. So these two went at once to remove the dust of the journey from their shining bodies. Dorothy also had a pretty suite of rooms, which she always occupied when in the Emerald City, but several servants walked ahead politely to show the way. Although she was quite sure she could find the rooms herself, she took Button Bright with her, because he seemed too small to be left alone in such a big palace. But Jelly Jam herself ushered the beautiful daughter of the rainbow to her apartments, because it was easy to see that Polychrome was used to splendid palaces, and was therefore entitled to especial attention. Chapter 19. The Shaggy Man's Welcome. The Shaggy Man stood in the great hall, his shaggy hat in his hands, wondering what would become of him. He had never been a guest in a fine palace before. Perhaps he had never been a guest anywhere in the big, cold outside world. People did not invite shaggy men to their homes, and this Shaggy Man of Oz had slept more in haylofts and stables than in comfortable rooms. When the others left the great hall, he eyed the splendidly dressed servants of the Princess Ozma, as if he expected to be ordered out. But one of them bowed before him as respectfully as if he had been a prince and said, "Permit me, sir, to conduct you to your apartments." The Shaggy Man drew a long breath and took courage. "Very well," he answered. "I'm ready." Through the big hall, they went up the grand staircase, carpeted thick with velvet, and so along a wide corridor to a carved doorway. Here the servant paused, and opening the door, said with polite deference, "Be good enough to enter, sir, and make yourself at home in the rooms of our royal Ozma has ordered prepared for you. Whatever you see is for you to use and enjoy, as if your own. The princess dines at 7, and I shall be here in time to lead you to the drawing room, where you will be privileged to meet the lovely ruler of Oz. Is there any command in the meantime with which you desire to honor me?" "No," said the Shaggy Man. "I'm not obliged." He entered the room and shut the door, and for a time stood in bewilderment, admiring the grandeur before him. He had been given one of the handsomest apartments in the most magnificent palace in the world, and she could not wonder that his good fortune astonished and awed him, until he grew used to his surroundings. The furniture was upholstered in cloth of gold, with the royal crown embroidered upon it in scarlet. The rug upon the marble floor was so thick and soft that he could not hear the sound of his own footsteps, and upon the walls were splendid tapestries, woven with scenes from the land of Oz. Books and ornaments were scattered about in profusion, and the Shaggy Man thought he had never seen so many pretty things in one place before. In one corner played a tinkling fountain, perfumed water. And another was a table bearing a golden tray, loaded with freshly gathered fruit, including several of the red-cheeked apples that the Shaggy Man loved. At the farther end of this charming room was an open doorway, and he crossed over to find himself in a bedroom containing more comforts than the Shaggy Man had ever before imagined. The bedstead was of gold, and set with many brilliant diamonds, and the coverlet had designs of pearls and rubies sewed upon it. At one side of the bedroom was a dainty dressing room, with closets containing a large assortment of fresh clothing, and beyond this was the bath, uh, large room having a marble pool big enough to swim in, with white marble steps leading down to the water. Around the edge of the pool were set rows of fine emeralds as large as doorknobs, while the water of the bath was clear as crystal. For a time the Shaggy Man gazed upon all this luxury with silent amazement. Then he decided, being wise in his ways, to take advantage of his good fortune. He removed his shaggy boots and his shaggy clothing and bathed in the pool with rare enjoyment. After he had dried himself with the soft towels, he went into the dressing room and took fresh linen from the drawers and put it on, finding that everything fitted him exactly. He examined the contents of the closets and selected an elegant suit of clothing. Strangely enough, everything about it was shaggy, although so new and beautiful, and he sighed with contentment to realize that he could now be finely dressed and still be the Shaggy Man. His coat was of rose-colored velvet, trimmed with shags and bobtails, with buttons of blood-red rubies and golden shags around the edges. His vest was a shaggy satin of a delicate cream color, and his knee breeches of rose velvet trimmed like the coat. Shaggy, creamy stockings of silk and shaggy slippers of rose leather with ruby buckles completed his costume. And when he was thus attired, the Shaggy Man looked at himself in a long mirror with great admiration. On a table he found a mother-of-pearl chest, decorated with delicate silver vines and flowers of clustered rubies, and on the cover was a silver plate engraved with these words: The Shaggy Man, his box of ornaments. The chest was not locked, so he opened it and was almost dazzled by the brilliance of the rich jewels it contained. After admiring the pretty things, he took out a fine golden watch with a big chain, several handsome finger rings, and an ornament of rubies to pin upon the breast of his shaggy shirt bosom. Having carefully brushed his hair and whiskers all the wrong way to make them look as shaggy as possible, the Shaggy Man breathed a deep sigh of joy and decided he was ready to meet the royal princess as soon as she sent for him. While he waited, he returned to the beautiful sitting room and ate several of the red-cheeked apples to pass away the time. Meanwhile, Dorothy had dressed herself in a pretty gown of soft gray embroidered with silver, and put a blue and gold suit of satin upon little Button Bright, who looked as sweet as a cherub in it. Followed by the boy and Toto, the dog, with a new green ribbon around his neck, she had hastened down to the splendid drawing room of the palace, where seated upon an exquisite throne of carved malachite and nestled amongst its green satin cushions was the lovely Princess Ozma, waiting eagerly to welcome her friend. Chapter 20. Princess Ozma of Oz. The royal historians of Oz, who are fine writers and know any number of big words, have often tried to describe the rare beauty of Ozma, and failed because the words were not good enough. So, of course, I cannot hope to tell you how great was the charm of this little princess, or how her loveliness put to shame all the sparkling jewels and magnificent luxury that surrounded her in this her royal palace. Whatever else was beautiful or dainty or delightful of itself faded to dullness when contrasted with Ozma's bewitching face and it has often been said by those who know that no other ruler in all the world can ever hope to equal the gracious charm of her manner. Everything about Ozma attracted one, and she inspired love and the sweetest affection rather than awe or ordinary admiration. Dorothy threw her arms around her little friend and hugged and kissed her rapturously. And Toto barked joyfully, and Button Bright smiled a happy smile, and consented to sit on the soft cushions close beside the princess.
Why didn't you send me word you were going to have a birthday party?
Asked the little Kansas girl when the first greetings were over.
Didn't I?
Asked Ozma. Her pretty eyes danced with merriment.
Did you?
Replied Dorothy, trying to think.
Who do you imagine, dear, mixed up those roads so as to start you wandering in the direction of Oz?
Inquired the princess.
Oh, I never expected you of that,
Cried Dorothy.
I've watched you in my magic picture all the way here,
Declared Ozma.
and twice I thought I should have to use the magic belt to save you and transport you to the Emerald City. Once was when the schoolers caught you, and again when you reached the Deadly Desert, where the Shaggy Man was able to help you out both times, so I did not interfere. Do you know who Buttonbright is?
Asked Dorothy.
No, I never saw him until you found him in the road, and then only in my magic picture. And did you send Polly to us? No, dear. The Rainbow's daughter slid from her father's pretty arch just in time to meet you. Well,
Said Dorothy.
I promised King Dox of Foxville and King Kickabray of Dunkerton that I'd ask you to invite them to your party. I have already done that, returned Ozma, because I thought it would please you to favor them. Did you fight the musicer?
Asked Button Bright.
No, because he would be too noisy and might interfere with the comfort of others. The music is not very good and is indulged in all the time. It is better that the performer should be alone,
said the princess.
I like the musicer's music,
Declared the boy gravely.
but I don't,
Said Dorothy.
Well, there will be plenty of music at my celebration, promised Ozma. So I've an idea, Button Bright. Won't miss the musicer at all. Just then, Polychrome danced in, and Ozma rose to greet the Rainbow's daughter in her sweetest and most cordial manner. Dorothy thought she had never seen two prettier creatures together than these lovely maidens, but Polly knew at once her own dainty beauty could not match that of Ozma, yet was not a bit jealous because this was so. The Wizard of Oz was announced, and a dried-up little old man, clothed in all black, entered the drawing room. His face was cheery, and his eyes twinkling with humor, so Polly and Button Bright were not at all afraid of the wonderful personage whose fame as a humbug magician had spread throughout the world. After greeting Dorothy with much affection, he stood modestly behind Ozma's throne and listened to the lively prattle of the young people. Now the Shaggy Man appeared, and so startling was his appearance, all clad in shaggy new raiment, that Dorothy cried, "Oh!" and clasped her hands impulsively as she examined her friend with pleased eyes. He's still Shaggy, all right,
remarked Button Bright, and Ozma nodded brightly because she had bent the Shaggy Man to remain shaggy when she provided his new clothes for him. Dorothy led him toward the throne, as he was shy in such fine company, and presented him gracefully to the princess, saying,
"This, your highness, is my friend, Shaggy Man, who owns the Love Magnet. You are welcome to Oz,"
said the girl ruler, in gracious accents.
"But tell me, sir, Where did you get the love magnet? Which you say you own? The Shaggy Man grew red and looked downcast as he answered in a low voice, I stole it, Your Majesty. Oh, Shaggy Man, cried Dorothy. How dreadful! And you told me the Eskimo gave you the love magnet. He shuffled first on one foot, and then on the other, much embarrassed. I told you a falsehood. I told you a falsehood, Dorothy, he said. But now having bathed in the truth pond, I must tell nothing but the truth. Why did you steal it? Asked Ozma gently. Because no one loved me or cared for me, said the Shaggy Man. And I wanted to be loved a great deal. It was owned by a girl in Butterfield who was loved too much, so that the young men quarreled over her, which made her unhappy. After I had stolen the magnet from her, only one young man continued to love her, and she married him and regained her happiness. Are you sorry you stole it? Asked the princess. No, Your Highness, I'm glad, he answered, for it has pleased me to be loved, and if Dorothy has not cared for me, I could not have accompanied her to this beautiful land of Oz, or met its kind-hearted ruler. Now that I'm here, I hope to remain, and to become one of Your Majesty's most faithful subjects. But in Oz, we are loved for ourselves alone, and for our kindness to one another, and for our good deeds, she said. I'll give up the love magnet, said the Shaggy Man eagerly. Dorothy shall have it. But everyone loves Dorothy already, declared the wizard. Then Button Bright shall have it. Don't want it, said the boy promptly. Then I'll give it to the wizard, for I'm sure the lovely Princess Ozma does not need it. All my people love the wizard too, announced the princess, laughing. So we will hang the love magnet over the gates of the Emerald City, that whoever shall enter or leave the gates may be loved and loving. That is a good idea, said the Shaggy Man. I agree to it most willingly. Those assembled now went in to dinner, which you can imagine was a grand affair, and afterward Ozma asked the wizard to give them an exhibition of his magic. The wizard took 8 tiny white piglets from an inside pocket and set them on the table. One was dressed like a clown, performed funny antics, and the others leaped over the spoons and dishes and ran around the table like racehorses, and turned handsprings and were so sprightly and amusing that they kept the company in one roar of merry laughter. The wizard had trained these pets to do many curious things, and they were so little and so cunning and soft that Polychrome loved to pick them up as they passed near her place and fondle them as if they were kittens. It was late when the entertainment ended, and they separated to go to their rooms. Tomorrow, said Ozma, my invited guests will arrive, and you will find among them some interesting and curious people, I promise you. The next day will be my birthday, and the festivities will be held on the broad green just outside the gates of the city, where all my people can assemble without being crowded. I hope the Scarecrow won't be late, said Dorothy anxiously. Oh, he is sure to return tomorrow, answered Ozma. He wanted new straw to stuff himself with, so he went to the Munchkin country, where straw is plentiful. With this, the princess bade her guest good night, and went to her own room. Chapter 21. Dorothy receives the guests. Next morning, Dorothy's breakfast was served in her own pretty sitting room, and she sent to invite Polly and the Shaggy Man to join her and Button Bright at the meal. They came gladly, and Toto also had breakfast with them, so that the little party that had traveled together to Oz was once more reunited. No sooner had they finished eating than they heard the distant blast of many trumpets and the sound of a brass band playing martial music.
So they all went out upon the balcony. This was at the front of the palace, and overlooked the streets of the city, being higher than the wall that shut in the palace grounds. They saw approaching down the streets a band of musicians, playing as hard and loud as they could, while the people of the Emerald City crowded the sidewalks and cheered so justly that they almost drowned the noise of the drums and horns. Dorothy looked to see what they were cheering at, and discovered that behind the band was the famous Scarecrow riding proudly upon the back of a wooden saw-horse, which pranced along the street almost as gracefully as if it had been made of flesh. Its hooves, or rather the ends of its wooden legs, were shod with plates of solid gold, and the saddle strapped to the wooden body was richly embroidered and glistened with jewels. As he reached the palace, the Scarecrow looked up and saw Dorothy, and at once waved his peaked hat at her in greeting. He rode up to the front door and dismounted, and the band stopped playing and went away, and the crowds of people returned to their dwellings. By the time Dorothy and her friends had entered her room, the Scarecrow was there, and he gave the girl a hearty embrace, and shook the hands of the others with his own squashy hands, which were white gloves filled with straw. The Shaggy Man, Button Bright, and Polychrome stared hard at this celebrated person, who was acknowledged to be the most popular and most beloved man in all the land of Oz.
Why, your face has been newly painted,
Exclaimed Dorothy, when the first greetings were over.
I had it touched up a bit by the Munchkin farmer who first made
me, answered the Scarecrow pleasantly.
My complexion has become a bit gray and faded, you know, and the paint had peeled off one end of my mouth, so I couldn't talk quite straight. Now I feel like myself again, and I may say without immodesty that my body is stuffed with the loveliest straw in all Oz.
He pushed against his chest.
Hear me crunkle?
He asked.
Yes,
said Dorothy.
You sound fine.
Button Bright was wonderfully attracted by the straw man, and so was Polly. The Shaggy Man treated him with great respect because he was so strangely made. Jelly Jam now came to say that Ozma wanted Princess Dorothy to receive the invited guest in the throne room. As they arrived, the ruler was herself busy ordering the preparations for the tomorrow's festivities, so she wished her friend to act in her place. Dorothy willingly agreed, being the only other princess in the Emerald City, so she went to the great throne room and sat in Ozma's seat, placing Polly on one side of her and Button Bright on the other. The Scarecrow stood at the left of the throne, and the Tin Woodsman at the right, while the wonderful wizard and the Shaggy Man stood behind. The Cowardly Lion and the Hungry Tiger came in, with bright new bows of ribbon on their collars and tails. After greeting Dorothy affectionately, the huge beast lay down at the foot of the throne. While they waited, the Scarecrow, who was near the little boy, asked, "Why are you called Button Bright?"
"Don't know,"
was the answer.
"Oh, yes, you do, dear,"
said Dorothy.
"Tell the Scarecrow how you got your name." "Papa always said I was bright as a button, so Mama always called me Button Bright,"
announced the boy. "Where is your mama?" asked the Scarecrow.
"Don't know,"
said Button Bright. "Where is your home?" asked the Scarecrow.
"Don't know,"
said Button Bright.
"Don't you want to find your mama again?"
asked the Scarecrow.
"Don't know,"
said Button Bright calmly. The Scarecrow looked thoughtful.
"Your papa may have been right," he observed, "but there are many kinds of buttons, you see. There are silver and gold buttons, which are highly polished and glitter brightly. There are pearl and rubber buttons, and other kinds with surfaces more or less bright.
but there is still another sort of button which is covered with dull cloth, and that must be the sort that your papa meant when he said you were bright as a button. Don't you think so?"
"Don't know," said Button Bright.
Jack Pumpkin had arrived, wearing a pair of new white kid gloves, and he brought a birthday present for Ozma, consisting of a necklace of pumpkin seeds. In each seed was set a sparkling carolite, which is considered the rarest and most beautiful gem that exists. The necklace was in a plush case, and Jellia Jam put it on a table with Princess Ozma's other presents. Next came a tall, beautiful woman, clothed in a splendid trailing gown, trimmed with exquisite lace as fine as cobweb. This was the important sorceress known as Glinda the Good, who had been of great assistance to both Ozma and Dorothy. There was no humbug about her magic, and you may be sure, and Glinda was as kind as she was powerful. She greeted Dorothy most lovingly and kissed Button Bright and Polly and smiled upon the Shaggy Man. After which Jellia Jam led the sorceress to one of the most magnificent rooms of the royal palace, and appointed 50 servants to wait upon her. The next arrival was Mr. H.M. Hogglebug, T.E., the H.M. meaning highly magnified, and the T.E. meaning thoroughly educated. The Wogglebug was head professor at the Royal College of Oz, and he had composed a fine ode in honor of Ozma's birthday. This he wanted to read to them, but the Scarecrow wouldn't let them. Soon they heard a clucking sound, and a chorus of cheep, cheep, and a servant threw open the door to allow Belinda and her 10 fluffy chicks to enter the throne room. As the yellow hen marched proudly at the head of her family, Dorothy cried,
"Oh, you lovely things!"
and ran down from her seat to pet the little yellow downy balls. Belinda wore a pearl necklace, and around the neck of each chicken was a tiny gold chain holding a locket with the letter D engraved upon the outside. "Open the lockets, Dorothy," said Belinda. The girl obeyed and found a picture of herself in each locket. "They were named after you, my dear," continued the yellow hen. "So I wanted all my chickens to wear your picture. Look, look. Come here, Dorothy, this minute," she cried, for the chickens were scattered and wandering all around the big room. They obeyed the call at once, and came running as fast as they could, fluttering their fluffy wings in a laughable way. It was lucky that Belinda gathered the little ones under her soft breast just then, for Tick-Tock came in and trampled up to the throne on his flat copper feet. "I am wound up and working finely," said the Clockwork Man to Dorothy.
"I can hear him tick," declared Button Bright.
"You are quite the polished gentleman," said the Tin Woodsman. "Stand up here beside the Shaggy Man, Tick-Tock, and help receive the company." Dorothy placed soft cushions in a corner for Belinda and her chicks, and had just returned to the throne, and seated herself when the playing of the royal band outside the palace announced the approach of distinguished guest. And my, how they did stare when the High Chamberlain threw open the doors and the visitors entered the throne room. First walked a gingerbread man, neatly formed and baked to a lovely brown tint. He wore a silk hat and carried a candy cane prettily striped with red and white. His shirt front and cuffs were white frosting, and the buttons on his coat were licorice drops. Behind the gingerbread man came a child with flaxen hair and merry blue eyes, dressed in white pajamas, with sandals on the soles of its pretty bare feet. The child looked around, smiling, and thrust its hands into the pockets of the pajamas. Close after it came a big rubber bear, walking erect on its hind feet. The bear had twinkling black eyes, and its body looked as if it had been pumped full of air. Following these curious visitors were two tall, thin men, and two short, fat men, all dressed in gorgeous uniforms. Ozma's High Chamberlain now hurried forward to announce the names of the new arrivals, calling out in a loud voice, "His gracious and most edible Majesty, King Do, the first ruler of the two kingdoms of Highland and Lowland, after the head bullywag of His Majesty, known as Chick the Cherub, and their faithful friend, Para Bruin the Rubber Bear." These great personages bowed low as their names were called, and Dorothy hastened to introduce them to the assembled company. They were the first foreign arrivals, and the friends of Princess Ozma were polite to them, and tried to make them feel that they were welcome. Chick the Cherub shook hands with every one, including Bellina, and was so joyous and frank and full of good spirits that John Doe's head, bullywagged at once, became a prime favorite.
Is it a boy or a girl?
Whispered Dorothy.
Don't know,
Said Button Bright.
Goodness me, what a strange lot you are.
Exclaimed the Goodness me, what a strange lot of people you are, exclaimed the Rubber Bear, looking at the assembled company.
So are you,
said Button Bright gravely.
Is King Do good to eat?
He's
too good to eat,
laughed Chick the Cherub.
I hope none of you are fond of gingerbread,
said the king rather anxiously. We would never think of inviting our visitors if we were, declared the Scarecrow. So please do not worry, for you will be perfectly safe while you remain in Oz.
Why do they call you Chick?
The yellow hen asked the child.
Because I'm an incubator baby and never had any parents,
replied the head bullywag.
My chicks have a parent, and I'm it,
said Bellina.
I'm glad of that,
answered the cherub,
because they'll have more fun worrying you than if they were brought up in an incubator. The incubator never worries, you know.
King John Doe had brought the for Ozma's birthday present a lovely gingerbread crown with rows of small pearls around it and a fine big pearl of each of its fine points. After this had been received by Dorothy with proper thanks placed on the table with the other presents, the visitors from Highland and Lowland were escorted to their rooms by the High Chamberlain. They had no sooner departed than the band before the palace began to play again, announcing more arrivals, and as these were doubtless from foreign parts of the High Chamberlain hurried back to receive them in his most official manner. Chapter 22. Important Arrivals. First entered a band of royals from the Happy Valley, all merry little spirits. Like fairy elves, a dozen crooked nooks followed from the great forest of Burzee. They had locked whiskers and pointed caps and curling toes, yet were no taller than Button Bright's shoulder. With this group came a man so easy to recognize and so important and dearly beloved throughout the known world that all present rose to their feet and bowed their heads in respectful homage. Even the High Chamberlain knelt to announce his name. The most mighty and loyal friend of children, His Supreme Highness, Santa Claus, said the Chamberlain in an odd voice. Well, 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 glad to see you, glad to meet you. Well, glad to see you, glad to meet you all, cried Santa Claus briskly, as he trotted up the long room. He was round as an apple, with a fresh, rosy face, laughing eyes, and a bushy beard as white as snow. A red cloak trimmed with beautiful ermine hung from his shoulders, and upon his back was a basket filled with pretty presents for the Princess Ozma. Hello, Dorothy. Still having adventures? He asked in his jolly way, as he took the girl's hand in both his own.
How did you know my name, Santa?
She replied, feeling more shy in the presence of this immortal saint than she ever had before in her young life. Why, don't I see you every Christmas Eve when you're asleep? He rejoined, pinching her blushing cheek.
Oh, do you?
And here's Button-Bright, I do declare, cried Santa Claus, holding up the boy to kiss him. What a long way from home you are, dear me.
Do you know Button-Bright too?
Questioned Dorothy eagerly. Indeed I do. I visited his home several times Christmas Eve. Several Christmas Eves.
And do you know his father?
Asked the girl. Certainly do, my dear. Who else do you suppose brings him his Christmas neckties and stockings? With a sly wink at the wizard. And where does
he live? We're just crazy to know, 'cause Button-Bright's lost, she said.
Santa laughed and laid his finger aside of his nose, as if thinking what to reply. He leaned over and whispered something in the wizard's ear, at which the wizard smiled and nodded, as if he understood. Now Santa spied Polychrome and trotted over to where she stood. Seems to me the Rainbow's Daughter is farther from home than any of you, he observed, looking at the pretty maiden admiringly. I'll have to tell your father where you are, Polly, and send him to get you.
Please do, dear Santa Claus,
implored the little maid beseechingly.
But just now, we must all have a jolly good time at Ozma's party.
But just now we must all have a jolly good time at Ozma's party, said the old gentleman, turning to put his presents on the table with the others already there. It isn't often I find time to leave my castle, as you know, but Ozma invited me, and I just couldn't help coming to celebrate the happy occasion.
I'm so glad, exclaimed Dorothy.
These are my Ryls, pointing to the little sprites squatting around him. Their business is to paint the colors of the flowers when they bud and bloom. But I brought the merry fellows along to see Oz, and they've left their paint pots behind them. Also, I brought these crooked Knooks, whom I love. My dears, the Knooks are much nicer than they look, for their duty is to water and care for the young trees of the forest. And they do their work faithfully and well. It's hard work, though, and it makes my Knooks crooked and gnarled, like the trees themselves, but their hearts are big and kind, as are the hearts of all who do good in our beautiful world.
I've read of Ryls and Knooks,
said Dorothy, looking upon these little workers with interest. Santa Claus turned to talk with the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodsman, and he also said a kind word to the Shaggy Man, and afterward went away to ride the Sawhorse around the Emerald City. For, said he, I must see all the grand sights while I am here, and have the chance, and Ozma has promised to let me ride the Sawhorse because I'm getting fat and short of breath.
Where are your reindeer?
Asked Polychrome. I left them at home, for it is too warm for them in this sunny country, he answered. They're used to winter weather when they travel. In a flash he was gone, and the Ryals and Nooks with them, but they could all hear the golden hoofs of the sawhorse ringing on the marble pavement outside, as he pranced away with his noble reindeer rider. Presently, the band played again, and the High Chamberlain announced, Her Gracious Majesty, the Queen of Maryland. They looked earnestly to discover whom this queen might be, and saw, advancing up the room, an exquisite wax doll, dressed in dainty fluffs, and ruffles, and spangled gowns. She was almost as big as Button Bright, and her cheeks and mouth and eyebrows were prettily painted in delicate colors. Her blue eyes stared a bit, being of glass, yet the expression upon her Majesty's face was quite pleasant and decidedly winning. With the Queen of Maryland were 4 wooden soldiers, 2 stalking ahead of her with much dignity, and 2 following behind, with a royal bodyguard. The soldiers were painted in bright colors and carried wooden guns, and after them came a fat little man who attracted attention at once, although he seemed modest and retiring, for he was made of candy, and carried a tin sugar sifter filled with powdered sugar, with which he dusted himself frequently so that he wouldn't stick to things if he touched them. The High Chamberlain had called him the Candy Man of Maryland, and Dorothy saw that one of his thumbs looked as if it had been bitten off by someone who was fond of candy, couldn't resist the temptation. The wax doll queen spoke prettily to Dorothy and the others, and sent her loving greetings to Ozma before she retired to the rooms prepared for her. She had brought a birthday present wrapped in tissue paper and tied with pink and blue ribbons, and one of the wooden soldiers placed it on the table with the other gifts. But the Candyman did not go to his room because he said he preferred to stay and talk with the Scarecrow and Tick-Tock, and the Wizard and Tin Woodsman, whom he declared the strangest people he had ever met. Button Bright was glad the Candyman stayed in the throne room, because the boy thought this guest smelled delicious of wintergreen and maple sugar. The braided man now entered the room, having been fortunate enough to receive an invitation to the Princess Ozma's party. He was from a cave halfway between the Invisible Valley and the country of the Gargoyles, and his hair and whiskers were so long that he was obliged to plait them into many braids that hung to his feet, and every braid was tied with a bow of colored ribbon. I've brought Princess Ozma a box of flutters for her birthday, said the braided man earnestly, and I hope she will like them, for they are the finest quality I've ever made.
I'm sure she will be greatly pleased,
said Dorothy, who remembered the braided man well, and the wizard introduced the guest of the rest of the company and made him sit down in a chair and keep quiet, for if allowed he would talk continually about the flutters. The band then played a welcome to another set of guests, and into the throne room swept the handsome and stately Queen of Ev. Beside her was young King Avado, and following them came the entire royal family of 5 princesses and 4 princes of Eve. Kingdom of Eve lay just across the deadly desert to the north of Oz, and once Ozma and her people had rescued the Queen of Eve and her 10 children from the Gnome King, who had enslaved them, Dorothy had been present on this adventure, so she greeted the royal family cordially. And all the visitors were delighted to meet the little Kansas girl again. They knew Tick-Tock and Belinda too, and the Scarecrow and Tin Woodsman, as well as the Lion and Tiger. So there was a joyful reunion, as you may imagine, and it was fully an hour before the Queen and her train retired to their rooms. Perhaps they would not have gone then had not the band begun to play to announce new arrivals. But before they left the great throne room, King Abado added to Ozma's birthday presents a diadem of diamonds set in radium. The next corner proved to be King Reynard of Foxville, or King Dox as he preferred to be called. He was magnificently dressed in a new feathered costume and wore white kid mittens over his paws, and a flower in his buttonhole, and had his hair parted in the middle. King Dox thanked Dorothy fervently for getting him the invitation to come to Oz, which he all his life longed to visit. He strutted around rather absurdly, and I'll take a commercial break right here. King Dox thanked Dorothy fervently for getting him the invitation to come to Oz, which he all his life longed to visit. He strutted around rather absurdly as he was introduced to all the famous people assembled in the throne room, and when he learned that Dorothy was a princess of Oz, the Fox King insisted on kneeling at her feet, and afterward retired back a dangerous thing to do, as he might have stubbed his paw, and tumbled over. No sooner was he gone Then the blast of bugles and clatter of drums and cymbals announced important visitors, and the High Chamberlain assumed his most dignified tone as he threw open the doors and said proudly, "Her sublime and resplendent Majesty, Queen Zixi of Ix, His Serene and Tremendous Majesty, King Bud of Nolan, Her Royal Highness, the Princess Fluff." That three such high and mighty royal personages should arrive at once was enough to make Dorothy and her companions grow solemn and assume their best company manners. But when the exquisite beauty of Queen Zixi met their eyes, they thought they had never beheld in anything so charming. Dorothy decided that Zixi must be about 16 years old, but the wizard whispered to her that this wonderful queen had lived thousands of years, but knew the secret of remaining always fresh and beautiful. King Bud of Noland and his dainty, fair-haired sister, the Princess Fluff, were friends of Zixi. As their kingdoms were adjoining, so they had travelled together from their far-off domains to do honor to Ozma of Oz on the occasion of her birthday. They brought many splendid gifts, so the table was now fairly loaded down with presents. Dorothy and Polly loved the Princess Fluff the moment they saw her, and little King Bud was so frank and boyish that Button Bright accepted him as a chum at once, did not want him to go away. But it was afternoon now, and the royal guest must prepare their toilets for the grand banquet at which they were to assemble that evening. To meet the reigning princess of this fairyland. So Queen Zixi was shown to her room by a troop of maidens, led by Jelly Jam and Bud and Fluff, presently withdrew to their own apartments.
"My, what a big party Ozma's going to have!"
exclaimed Dorothy.
"I guess the palace will be chock full, Button Bright, don't you think so?" "Don't know," said the boy. "But we must go to our rooms pretty soon to dress for the banquet," continued the girl.
"I don't have to dress,"
said the Candy Man from Maryland.
"All I need to do is to dust myself with fresh sugar."
Chick-Tock always wears the same suit of clothes, said the Tin Woodsman. And so does our friend the Scarecrow.
"My feathers are good enough for any occasion,"
cried Belinda from her corner. Then
I shall leave you four to welcome any new guests that come,
said Dorothy.
For Button Bright and I must look our very best at Ozma's banquet.
Who is still to come? Asked the Scarecrow. Well, there's King Kickabray of Dunkerton, and Johnny Dewett, and the Good Witch of the North, but Johnny Dewett may not get here until late. He's so very busy. We will receive them and give them a proper welcome, promised the Scarecrow. So run along, little Dorothy, and get yourself dressed. Chapter 23, The Grand Banquet. I wish I could tell you how fine the company was that assembled that evening at Ozma's royal banquet. A long table was spread in the center of the great dining hall of the palace, and the splendor of the decorations and the blaze of lights and jewels was acknowledged to be the most magnificent sight that any of the guests had ever seen. The jolliest person present, as well as the most important, was, of course, old Santa Claus. So he was given the seat of honor at one end of the table, while at the other end sat Princess Ozma and the hostess. John Doe, Queen Zixi, King Bud, the Queen of Ev, and her son Evado, and the Queen of Maryland had golden thrones to sit in, while the others were supplied with beautiful chairs. At the upper end of the banquet room was a separate table provided for the animals. Toto sat at one end of this table with a bib tied around his neck, and a silver platter to eat from. At the other end was placed a small stand, with a low rail around the edge of it. For Belinda and her chicks, the rail kept the 10 little Dorothys from falling off the stand, while the yellow hen could easily reach over and take her food from a tray upon the table. At other places sat the hungry tiger, the cowardly lion, the sawhorse, the rubber bear, and the fox king, and the donkey king. They made quite a company of animals. At the lower end of the great room was another table, at which sat the Ryls and Knooks who had come with Santa Claus, the wooden soldiers who had come with the Queen of Maryland, and the Hilllanders and Jolanders and Lowlanders who had come with John Doe. Here were also seated the officers of the royal palace and of Ozma's army. Splendid costumes of those at the 3 tables made a gorgeous and glittering display that no one present was ever likely to forget. Perhaps there had never been in any part of the world at any time such another assemblage of such wonderful people as that which gathered this evening to honor the birthday of the ruler of Oz. When all members of Eve's company were in their places, an orchestra of 500 pieces in a balcony overlooking the banquet room began to play sweet and delightful music. Then a door draped with royal green opened, and in came the fair and girlish Princess Ozma, who now greeted her guest in person for the first time. As she stood by her throne at the head of the banquet table, every eye was turned eagerly upon the lovely princess, who was as dignified as she was bewitching, and who smiled upon all her old and new friends in a way that touched their hearts, and brought an answering smile to every face. Each guest had been served with a crystal goblet, filled with lacasa, which is a sort of nectar famous in Oz, and nicer to drink than soda water or lemonade. Santa now made a pretty speech in verse, congratulating Ozma on having a birthday, and asking everyone present to drink to the health and happiness of their dearly beloved hostess. This was done with great enthusiasm by those who were made so they could drink at all, and those who could not drink politely touched the rims of their goblets to their lips. All seated themselves at the table, and the servants of the princess began serving the feast. I am quite sure that only in Fairyland could such a delicious repast be prepared. The dishes were of precious metals set with brilliant jewels, and the good things to eat which were placed upon them were countless in number, and of exquisite flavor. Some were present, such as the Candy Man, the Rubber Bear, Tick-Tock, and the Scarecrow, were not made so they could eat, and the Queen of Maryland contented herself with a small dish of sawdust. But these enjoyed the pomp and glitter of the gorgeous scene as much as did those who feasted. The Wogglebug read his ode to Ozma, which was written in very good rhythm, and was well received by the company. The wizard added to the entertainment by making a big pie appear before Dorothy, and when the little girl cut the pie, the 9 tiny piglets leaped out of it, and danced around the table, while the orchestra played a merry tune. This amused the company very much, but they were even more pleased when Polychrome, whose hunger had been easily satisfied, rose from the table and performed her graceful and bewildering rainbow dance for them. When it was ended, the people clapped their hands and the animals clapped their paws, while Belinda cackled and the Donkey King brayed approval. Johnny Dewett was present, and of course he proved he could do wonders in the way of eating, as well as in everything else that he undertook to do. The Tin Woodsman sang a lovely song, everyone joining in the chorus. And the wooden soldiers from Maryland gave an exhibition of a lighting drill with their wooden muskets. The Ryals and Nooks danced the fairy circle, and the Rubber Bear bounced himself all around the room. There was laughter and merriment on every side, and everybody was having a royal good time. Button Bright was so excited and interested that he paid little attention to his fine dinner and a great deal of attention to his strange companions. Perhaps he was wise to do this, because he could eat at any other time. The feasting and merrymaking continued until late in the evening, when they separated to meet again the next morning and take part in a birthday celebration to which this royal banquet was merely the introduction. Chapter 24, The Birthday Celebration. A clear, perfect day with a gentle breeze and a sunny sky greeted Princess Ozma as she wakened next morning, the anniversary of her birth. While it was yet early, all the city was astir, and crowd of people came from all parts of the land of Oz to witness the festivities in honor of the girl ruler's birthday. The noted visitors from foreign countries who had all been transported to the Emerald City by means of the magic belt were as much a show to the Ozites as were their own familiar celebrities, and the streets leading from the royal palace to the jeweled gates were thronged with men, women, and children to see the procession as it passed out to the green fields where the ceremonies were to take place. And what a great procession it was! First came 1,000 young girls, the prettiest in the land, dressed in white muslin, with green sashes and hair ribbons, bearing green baskets of red roses. As they walked, they scattered these flowers upon the marble pavements, so that the way was carpeted thick with roses for the procession to walk upon. Then came the rulers of the 4 kingdoms of Oz, the Emperor of the Winkies, the Monarch of the Munchkins, the King of the Quadlings, and the Sovereign of the Gillikins, each wearing a long chain of emeralds around his neck to show that he was a vassal of the ruler of the Emerald City. Next marched the Emerald City Cornet Band, clothed in green and gold uniforms and playing the Ozma two-step. The Royal Army of Oz followed, consisting of 27 officers, from the Captain General down to the lieutenants. There were no privates in Ozma's army because soldiers were not needed to fight battles, but only to look important, and an officer always looks more imposing than a private. While the people cheered and waved their hats and handkerchiefs, they came walking the royal Princess Ozma, looking so pretty and sweet that it is no wonder her people love her so dearly. She had decided she would not ride in her chariot that day, as she preferred to walk in the procession with her favored subjects and her guest. Just in front of her trotted the living blue bear rug, owned by old Dinah, which wobbled clumsily on its 4 feet because there was nothing but the skin to support them, with a stuffed head at one end and a stubby tail at the other. But whenever Ozma paused in her walk, a bare rug would flop down flat upon the ground for the princess to stand upon until she resumed her progress. Following the princess stalked her two enormous beasts, the cowardly lion and the hungry tiger. And even if the army had not been there, these two would have been powerful enough to guard their mistress from any harm. Next marched the invited guests, who were loudly cheering by the people of Oz along the road, and were therefore obliged to bow to right and left almost every step of the way. First was Santa Claus, who because he was fat and not used to walking, rode the wonderful sawhorse. The merry old gentleman had a basket of small toys with him, and he tossed the toys one by one to the children as he passed by. His Ryls and Knooks marched close behind him. Queen Zixie of Ix came after. Then John Doe and the cherub with the rubber bear named Para Bruin, strutting between them on its hind legs. Then the Queen of Maryland, escorted by her wooden soldiers. Then King Bud of Noland and his sister, the Princess Fluff. Then the Queen of Ev and her 10 royal children. Then the Braided Man and the King and the Candy Man, side by side. Then King Dox of Foxville and King Kickabray of Dunkerton, who by this time had become good friends. And finally, Johnny Dewett in his leather apron, smoking his long pipe. These wonderful personages were not more heartily cheered by the people than were those who followed after them. In the procession, Dorothy was a general favorite, and she walked arm in arm with the Scarecrow, who was beloved by all. Then came Polychrome and Button Bright, and the people loved the Rainbow's pretty daughter and the beautiful blue-eyed boy as soon as they saw them. The Shaggy Man in his shaggy new suit attracted much attention because he was such a novelty. With regular steps trampled the Machine Man Tick-Tock, and there was more cheering when the Wizard of Oz followed in the procession. The Wogglebug and Jack Pumpkinhead were next, and behind them Glinda the Sorceress and the Good Witch of the North. Finally came Belinda with her brood of chickens, to whom she clucked anxiously to keep them together and to hasten them along so they would not delay the procession. Another band followed, this time the Tin Band of the Emperor of the Winkies, playing a beautiful march called There's No Plate Like Tin. Then came the servants of the royal palace in a long line, and behind them all the people joined the procession and marched away through the emerald gates and out upon the broad green. Here had been erected a splendid pavilion, with a grand stand big enough to seat all the royal party and those who had taken part in the procession. Over the pavilion, which was of green silk and cloth of gold, countless banners waved in the breeze. Just in front of this, and connected with it by a runway, had been built a broad platform so that all the spectators could see plainly the entertainment provided for them. The wizard now became master of ceremonies, as Ozma had placed the conduct of the performance in his hands. After the people had all congregated about the platform, and the royal party and the visitors were seated in the grand stand, the wizard skillfully performed some feats of juggling glass balls and lighted candles. He tossed a dozen or so of them high in the air and caught them one by one, as they came down without missing any. Then he introduced the Scarecrow, who did a sword-swallowing act that aroused much interest After this, the Tin Woodsman gave an exhibition of swinging the axe, which he made to whirl around him so rapidly that the eye could scarcely follow the motion of the gleaming blade. Glinda the sorceress then stepped upon the platform, and by her magic made a big tree grow in the middle of the space, made blossoms appear upon the tree, and made the blossoms become delicious fruit called tamarnas. And so great was the quantity of the fruit produced that when the servants climbed the tree and tossed it down to the crowds, there was enough to satisfy every person present. Bruin the rubber bear climbed to a limb of the big tree, rolled himself into a ball, and dropped to the platform, whence he bounced up again to the limb. He repeated this bouncing act several times to the great delight of all the children present. After he had finished, and bowed, and returned to his seat, Glinda waved her wand, and the tree disappeared. But its fruit still remained to be eaten. The good witch of the north amused the people by transforming 10 stones into 10 birds, the 10 birds into 10 lambs, and the 10 lambs into 10 little girls, who gave a pretty dance and were then transformed into 10 stones again, just as they were in the beginning. Johnny Dewett next came on the platform with his tool chest, and in a few minutes built a great flying machine, then put his chest in the machine, and the whole thing flew away together again. Flew away together. Johnny and all, after he had bid goodbye to those present and thanked the princess for her hospitality. The wizard then announced the last act of all, which was considered really wonderful. He had invented a machine to blow huge soap bubbles, as big as balloons, and this machine was hidden under the platform, so that only the rim of the big clay pipe to produce the bubbles showed above the flooring. The tank of soap suds, and the air pumps to inflate the bubbles were out of sight beneath, so that when the bubbles began to grow upon the floor of the platform, it really seemed like magic to the people of Oz, who knew nothing about even the common soap bubbles that our children blow with a penny clay pipe and a basin of soap and water. The wizard had invented another thing. Usually soap bubbles are frail and burst easily, lasting only a few moments, as they float in the air. But the wizard added a sort of glue to his soap spuds, which made his bubbles tough, and as the glue dried rapidly when exposed to the air, the wizard's bubbles were strong enough to float for hours without breaking. He began by blowing by means of his machinery and air pumps several large bubbles, which he allowed to float upward into the sky, where the sunshine fell upon them, and gave them iridescent hues that were most beautiful. This aroused much wonder and delight, because it was a new amusement to everyone present except perhaps Dorothy and Button Bright, and even they had never seen such big, strong bubbles before. The wizard then blew a bunch of small bubbles, and afterward blew a big bubble around them, so they were left in the center of it. Then he allowed the whole mass of pretty globes float into the air, disappear in the far distant sky. "That is really fine," declared Santa Claus, who loved toys and pretty things. "I think, Mr. Wizard, I shall have you blow a bubble around me. Then I can float away home and see the country spread out beneath me as I travel. There isn't a spot on Earth that I haven't visited, but I usually go in the night time, riding behind my swift reindeer. Here is a good chance to observe the country by daylight, while I am riding slowly and at my ease." "Do you really think you will be able to guide the bubble?" asked the wizard. "Oh yes, I know enough magic to do that," replied Santa Claus. "You blow the bubble with me, inside of it, and I'll be sure to get home in safety.
Please send me home in a bubble too,
begged the Queen of Maryland. Very well, madam. You shall try the journey first, politely answered old Santa. The pretty wax doll bade goodbye to the Princess Ozma and the others, and stood on the platform while the wizard blew a big soap bubble around her. When completed, he allowed the bubble to float slowly upward, and there could be seen the little Queen of Maryland standing in the middle of it and blowing kisses from her fingers to those below. The bubble took a southerly direction, quickly floating out of sight.
That's a very nice way to travel, said Princess Fluff. I'd like to go home in a bubble too.
So the wizard blew a big bubble around Princess Fluff, another around King Bud, her brother, and a third one around Queen Zixie. And soon these 3 bubbles had mounted into the sky and were floating off in a group in the direction of the kingdom of Noland. The success of these ventures induced the other guests from foreign lands to undertake bubble journeys also, so the wizard put them one by one inside his bubbles, and Santa Claus directed the way they should go, because he knew exactly where everybody lived. Finally, Button Bright said,
I want to go home too.
Why, you shall, cried Santa, for I'm sure your father and mother will be glad to see you again. Mr. Wizard, please blow a big, fine bubble for Button Bright to ride in, and I'll agree to send him home to his family as safe can be.
I'm sorry, said Dorothy with a sigh, for she was fond of her little comrade. But perhaps it's best for Button Bright to get home, because folks must be worrying just dreadful.
She kissed the boy, and Ozma kissed him too, and all the others waved their hands and said goodbye and wished him a pleasant journey.
Are you glad to leave us, dear?
asked Dorothy a little wistfully.
Don't know,
said Button Bright. He sat down cross-legged on the platforms with his sailor hat ripped back on his head. And the wizard blew a beautiful bubble all around him. A minute later, it had mounted into the sky, sailing toward the west, and the last they saw of Button Bright, he was still sitting in the middle of the shining globe and waving a sailor hat at those below.
Will you ride in a bubble, or shall I send you and Toto home by means of the magic belt?
The princess asked Dorothy.
Guess I'll use the belt,
replied the little girl.
I'm sort of afraid of those bubbles,
said Toto approvingly. He loved to bark at the bubbles as they sailed away, but he didn't care to ride in one. Santa Claus decided to go next. He thanked Ozma for her hospitality and wished her many happy returns of the day. Then the wizard blew a bubble around his chubby little body and smaller bubbles around each of his riles and nooks. As the kind and generous friend of children mounted into the air, the people all cheered at the top of their voices, for they loved Santa Claus dearly. The little man heard them through the walls of his bubble and waved his hands in return as he smiled down upon them. The band played bravely while everyone watched the bubble until it was completely out of sight.
How about you, Polly?
Dorothy asked her friend.
Are you afraid of bubbles too? No,
answered Polychrome, smiling.
But Santa Claus promised to speak to my father as he passed through the sky, so perhaps I shall get home on easier way.
Indeed, the little maid had scarcely made this speech when a sudden radiance filled the air, and while the people looked on in wonder, the end of a gorgeous rainbow slowly settled down upon the platform. With a glad cry, the rainbow's daughter sprang from her seat and danced along the curve of the rainbow, mounting gradually upward, while the folds of her gauzy gown whirled and floated around her like a cloud and blended with the colors of the rainbow itself.
Goodbye, Ozma. Goodbye, Ozma. Goodbye, Dorothy.
Cried a voice they knew belonged to Polychrome. But now the little maiden's form had melted wholly into the rainbow, and their eyes could no longer see her. Suddenly the end of the rainbow lifted, and its colors slowly faded like mist before a breeze. Dorothy sighed deeply and turned to Ozma.
I'm sorry to lose Polly, she said, but I guess she's better off with her father, 'cause even the Land of Oz couldn't be like home to a cloud fairy. No, indeed, replied the princess, but it has been delightful for us to know Polychrome for a little while. Who knows? Perhaps we may meet the Rainbow's daughter again someday. The entertainment being now ended, all left the pavilion and formed the happy precision back to the Emerald City again. Of Dorothy's recent traveling companions, only Toto and the Shaggy Man remained, and Ozma had decided to allow the latter to live in Oz for a time, at least if he proved honest and true. She promised to let him live there always. The Shaggy Man was anxious to earn this reward. They had a nice, quiet dinner together and passed a pleasant evening with the Scarecrow, the Tin Woodsman, Tick-Tock, and the Yellow Hen for company. When Dorothy bade them good night, she kissed them all goodbye. At the same time, for Ozma had agreed that while Dorothy slept, she and Toto should be transported by means of the magic belt to her own little bed in the Kansas farmhouse. The little girl laughed at she thought how astonished Uncle Henry and Aunt Em would be when she came down to breakfast with them next morning, quite content to have had so pleasant an adventure, and a little tired by all the day's busy scenes. Dorothy clasped Toto in her arms and lay down upon the pretty white bed in her room in Ozma's royal palace. Presently she was sound asleep. And that ends the story. All right. Thank you everyone for watching. I'm not going to go ahead and continue into a new book. We'll save that for another time. Another time being next year, or well, likely next year. For right now, thank you everyone for watching. Have a great night. Stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you all on. My plan is Wednesday for Disney Dreamlight Valley. I'm probably going to go ahead and do some uploads of Marvel's Midnight Suns. Get some of the backlog videos out to all. And for right now, let's go ahead and find someone to raid off to. All right, I want to see if I can raid off this person. Nope. Okay.
let's try this person. Yep, okay. Let's try this person. Nope, okay. All right, so we're gonna go and raid the Elf channel. Please give Elf some love and support as you enjoy the classic show from the 80s or 70s? I can't remember. Scarox, hello. Nice to see you. I'm ending stream. See you all later.